Some experiences in life don't ask permission to happen. They simply emerge silently and completely change the way we see everything around us. Among older folks, there's a phenomenon that's rarely discussed, but profoundly impactful. A distant look, a pause in time, a phrase spoken with serene conviction. These are moments when it seems like something beyond this world reveals itself, subtly but unmistakably. Dolores Cannon, a tireless scholar of consciousness, observed this phenomenon in countless seniors over decades. For her, there was a clear pattern, a strong signal that repeated itself across different cultures, languages, and contexts. And according to her accounts, this signal was the same in all cases. This isn't about blind faith, nor is it a strange theory. It's an observation that comes from attentively listening to those who've lived long enough to not need to prove anything to anyone anymore. A kind of truth that can't be explained, but that's clearly felt. In her interviews, Dolores reported that many older people, shortly before passing, described specific visions. These weren't uncontrolled hallucinations, but rather calm, lucid, and consistent encounters with presences that seemed familiar. These accounts became so frequent that she began to systematically note them. And that's when the most impressive discovery emerged. There was a common thread in almost every case, a signal that seemed to be the key to everything. If you've ever known someone who completely changed their behavior in their final days, you may have witnessed this phenomenon without realizing it. In this video, we'll delve into this discovery with respect and clarity, especially for you who values the wisdom of life. And if this topic resonates with you, please consider subscribing and giving us a thumbs up. It's a way for us to continue together on this journey of such important discoveries. According to Dolores, the strongest sign that an older person is beginning to see the spiritual world is a sudden change in their perception of time. People who are previously stuck in rigid routines or who are impatient with the present begin to act as if time no longer matters. They observe the sky more, remain silent for long periods, and speak differently, as if they're hearing something that others don't. This change isn't accompanied by suffering or confusion. On the contrary, it's often marked by an unusual serenity, as if something within them has finally made peace with the world. Dolores noticed this in hundreds of accounts. It didn't matter if it was a farmhand in the United States or an urban lady in India. The language changes, but the content is always similar. It's as if they're preparing for something much bigger, without fear, without urgency, just with acceptance. It's important to say that this transition isn't sudden. It often begins weeks or even months before any more serious physical signs appear. An older person might start commenting about visits from loved ones who have already passed on very matter-of-factly. They might say they dreamed of places they've never been, but describe them with impressive detail. In many cases, these visions are accompanied by a tranquility that surprises even doctors and caregivers. Dolores Cannon called this contact with expanded consciousness. She said that at this stage of life, the veil between worlds becomes thinner, allowing glimpses of a reality that's beyond our own. This doesn't depend on religion, faith, or belief. It's something that simply happens, like the sunset that arrives without asking permission, but transforms the entire landscape when it appears. This change in perception isn't just internal. More attentive family members and friends also notice different behaviors. The person starts smiling more for no apparent reason, demonstrates more kindness, or becomes more introspective. It might seem confusing at first, but these signs point to a kind of silent preparation, as if something within them is already in another stage, even while they're still here. Dolores emphasized that this didn't mean giving up on life. On the contrary, it was an awakening to a new understanding of it. The fear of death, according to many accounts she collected, practically disappeared in these moments. In its place, a kind of greater understanding emerged, difficult to put into words, but which transformed the way the person dealt with everything around them. In several sessions, Dolores heard phrases like, "I know I'm not alone," or "They've come to get me." These words didn't come with anguish, but with a peaceful certainty. Many older folks, even without having read anything about spirituality, reported similar experiences. It was as if, at the end of life, an innate wisdom awakened, an understanding that didn't come from books, but from their own lived journey. This connection with the spiritual world in these cases wasn't spectacular or dramatic. It was simple, human, present in small gestures, in long looks, in silences full of meaning. For those around them, recognizing this sign can be a gift. It's an opportunity to listen more attentively, to be present with more respect, and to understand that the end of life can actually be the beginning of another perception. This broader perception also affects the way a person interprets their memories. Dolores Cannon pointed out that many older people begin to revisit old events with a different perspective. Situations that once seemed painful are now seen with understanding, and old hurts are dissolved without effort. It's as if the mind enters a state of reorganization, filtering what really matters, and leaving behind what no longer has weight. This, according to her, isn't just psychological. It's part of the process of reconnecting with a more subtle dimension of existence. People who previously avoided talking about the past begin to do so naturally, as if they're organizing the pieces of a puzzle that finally makes sense. This sudden clarity, this peace with what was lived, is another indication that something profound is happening, something that goes beyond medical or scientific explanations, but that's perceived clearly by those close by. Another common characteristic observed by Dolores is the emergence of a more intense connection with nature. Many older people begin to observe with more interest the movement of trees, the sound of birds, the light that enters the window at certain times of the day. Small details of everyday life gain new importance. She saw this as a sign that consciousness is tuning in to more subtle aspects of reality. It's not uncommon for the person in these phases to express a desire to be closer to the countryside, to see the sea, or feel the earth on their feet. It's a silent call that seems to come from within, as if the body knows it's approaching something essential. This change of focus, this more contemplative gaze, doesn't arise by chance. Dolores believed that it's at this moment that the spirit begins to detach from matter, preparing for a smooth and conscious transition. In many cases, this process is accompanied by a change in the way a person relates to others. Arguments cease to make sense, and there's a tendency to seek reconciliation, even with distant people. Dolores reported that this inclination to forgive and ask for forgiveness is one of the biggest signs that the soul is in tune with something greater. She said that when consciousness expands, the ego diminishes, and the heart takes command. This leads to unexpected conversations, to gestures of affection that weren't present before, and to a lightness in relationships. Family members who had been distant may be called for visits. Old friends may appear in memories or even make contact after years. These movements aren't random. They're parts of a broader process in which everything seems to converge towards the essential: connection, understanding, and peace. There are also reports about the sensation of hearing voices or receiving very clear internal messages. Dolores was always cautious when addressing this point, as she knew it could be confused with clinical symptoms. However, she emphasized that there was a clear difference between delusion and spiritual perception. The accounts she received were coherent, calm, and often accompanied by admirable lucidity. Older people said they heard their names in moments of silence, or felt simple guidance like, "Now it's time to rest," or "Everything will be all right." These messages brought comfort and meaning, as if they came from a place of love and care. For Dolores, this was part of communication with higher dimensions, something that became possible when the body began to quiet down and the spirit gained more space to express itself directly and gently. It's at this stage that many older folks begin to report dreams that are different from those they had before. Instead of confusing images, they begin to have vivid dreams in which they meet people who have already passed or visit unknown but incredibly beautiful places. Dolores called these dreams preparatory visits. She believed they were real experiences, lived outside the body, in subtle planes of consciousness. Many woke up with tears in their eyes, not from sadness, but from emotion. They reported having received hugs, heard comforting words, or simply felt a peace they had never experienced. These dreams were repeated frequently in the last months of life, as if they were preparing the soul for a new environment. When questioned, many said they no longer feared what was to come. They felt that something good awaited them, something that words couldn't describe, but that was deeply welcoming. This process, despite being very individual, follows patterns that Dolores Cannon identified over years of research. In different parts of the world, older people with diverse cultures and religions reported similar experiences. The conclusion she drew is that the human spirit, as it approaches the final transition, naturally begins to access a broader consciousness. This isn't about belief, but about constant and careful observation. According to her, those who are attentive to these signs can learn a lot from this process. It's a phase rich in wisdom, revelations, and above all, reconciliation with one's own journey. Therefore, it's so important to listen calmly, to accompany with patience, and to respect the silences that arise. In them, often, is the clearest message of all. The spiritual world in these moments is no longer a distant idea. It becomes a real presence, felt deeply by those who are ready to see. It's common for those around them not to know how to react to these changes. Some get scared, others ignore it out of fear of facing the reality of finiteness. Dolores Cannon always insisted that the best response in these cases is active listening. When an older person says they dreamed of someone who has died or reports feeling presences in the room, you shouldn't interrupt or try to correct them. The ideal is to ask calmly what they saw, how they felt, what they perceived. This openness strengthens trust and allows the person to share more details, often revealing aspects they hadn't yet dared to share. This type of listening also helps family members realize that it isn't a symptom, but rather a phase of expanding consciousness. With this approach, the transition can be experienced with more serenity, and the surrounding environment itself transforms into a more welcoming and understanding space. Dolores also observed that, in many cases, older people begin to speak more philosophically, even those who never had an interest in spiritual or existential subjects. Questions arise such as, why are we here? What happens next? And was it all worth it? These reflections don't arise with anguish, but with a kind of genuine curiosity. It's as if the mind, sensing that the cycle is closing, seeks deeper answers. Dolores didn't see this as a sign of weakness or melancholy, but as a clear sign of expansion. The conscious mind begins to open to possibilities that were previously dormant. In this phase, many people rediscover values, revisit beliefs, and even change their minds about topics they previously considered certain. It's a natural movement of internal reorganization, a preparation for something that's to come, even if no one knows for sure what it will be like. Some older people also report a very specific feeling of having one foot here and one foot there. They say that, at certain times, they feel as if they've left their bodies, even while awake. Dolores collected many such accounts, described calmly and with rich detail. They spoke of floating above their own bed, of observing themselves from outside, or of hearing conversations taking place in another room. These events, according to her, aren't delusions or the product of the imagination. They're legitimate experiences of out-of-body experiences, typical of those who are gradually detaching from matter. In many cases, these experiences left the person more peaceful, as if they had received a sample of what was to come. And after experiencing them, they began to face the rest of their days with a different lightness, without hurry, without fear, just living in the present with more surrender. It's at this point in the journey that the presence of family members and caregivers becomes even more essential. Dolores Cannon reinforced that, no matter how much consciousness is expanding, human affection is still irreplaceable. A touch on the hand, a word spoken calmly, a look of affection are gestures that anchor the person in this world while they prepare for the next. Many older people, even in the face of these spiritual perceptions, continue to intensely value the presence of their children, grandchildren, or friends. It's a phase in which love is expressed in a simple, direct way, without grand speeches. Just being together already has enormous weight. And according to Dolores, this affectionate bond between worlds is one of the most beautiful aspects of this stage, because it shows that even in the face of transition, there's still room for what is most human: care. It's also common for older people to have a lighter emotional routine, even when facing physical pain. Dolores saw this as an indication that the mind is no longer so identified with the body. The person may have limitations, but demonstrates a peace that's surprising. Spontaneous smiles, unexpected thanks, and gestures of tenderness become more frequent. In some cases, she even noticed temporary improvements, as if the body responded positively to this new internal vibration. For Dolores, this wasn't a miracle, but a natural consequence of an expanding consciousness. The body, even with its limitations, benefits from this higher mental state. For this reason, she always recommended that the emotional behavior of older people be observed more than just the physical signs. Many answers are in this invisible but very real realm. As the end approaches, there's a tipping point that many don't perceive. Dolores called this moment total openness. It's when the older person begins to say goodbye, even if they don't say it in words. They begin to donate personal items, organize photos, talk more often about cherished memories. All of this is part of a process of symbolic closure, as if they wanted to leave everything in order to go on their journey. This type of attitude, according to her, is another strong indication that the soul has already understood that it's about to change state. And instead of resisting, it welcomes this movement naturally. For those around them, it can be difficult to deal with this type of farewell, but it's also an invitation to gratitude, to listening, and to presence, because in these simple gestures, the older person is saying more than words can express. Even among healthcare professionals, Dolores Cannon said that there were those who noticed these signs, although they didn't always know what to call them. Nurses, caregivers, and doctors who followed elderly patients for long periods often reported similar changes. It wasn't uncommon to hear that the patient seemed to be in two worlds at the same time, or that their physical presence seemed lighter. Some professionals, even without any connection to spiritual topics, confirmed that certain older people seemed to know when their time was coming. They reported this with respect, observing that these people demonstrated a different acceptance, which couldn't be explained solely by medical logic. Dolores saw this as practical evidence that, even in clinical environments, the spiritual world manifests itself and can be perceived by those who are willing to look beyond exams and procedures. These accounts multiplied over Dolores's decades of research. Each new story brought nuances, but always confirmed the same central point. The approach of the end of life can be accompanied by a profound awakening of consciousness. It isn't a negative or somber process. On the contrary, it's often described as a reunion with something very familiar, something that has always been present, but that's only now revealed with clarity. Dolores believed that by understanding these signs, both the older person and their family can live this phase with more dignity and meaning. Instead of fearing or denying what's to come, they can embrace the experience with more understanding. This attitude transforms the environment, improves relationships, and allows the farewell to take place more serenely, as a natural part of a larger journey. Contrary to what many think, this spiritual connection at the end of life doesn't require special preparation or advanced knowledge. Dolores Cannon reinforced that everyone, regardless of their beliefs, is capable of experiencing this process. It doesn't choose more religious or mystical people. It simply happens as part of the very nature of existence. The most important thing, according to her, is to allow it to happen without blockages. When family members and caregivers are open, listen with respect, and validate the older person's perceptions, everything becomes lighter. Fear decreases, communication improves, and the parting process transforms into a moment of deep connection. It isn't about guessing the future or trying to control the end. It's about recognizing that, even in the last chapter, life continues to teach us with wisdom and beauty. The farewell, in this context, isn't a sharp cut, but a transition. Dolores always repeated that dying is like crossing a doorway. For those who stay, it may seem like the end, but for those who go, it's just the beginning of a new stage. The signs observed in older people who are beginning to see the spiritual world are like small clues left along the way. They show us that there's more than meets the eye, and that this passage can be lived with peace, consciousness, and even hope. Throughout life, we accumulate experiences, learning, and affections. When the time comes to leave, all of this transforms into baggage for this new journey. Dolores Cannon dedicated her life to listening to these stories and sharing them with the world, not to convince anyone, but to show that there's meaning, even in the most silent moments. If you have an older person in the family, you may have already noticed some of these signs. And if you're living this now, remember that every gesture you make makes a difference. Being present, listening without rushing, respecting the rhythm and feelings are attitudes that are worth more than any words. The spiritual world, according to Dolores, isn't distant. It begins to show itself when we open our hearts to perceive it. Old age, often seen as an end, can also be an awakening, a moment of greatness, in which the body withdraws and the soul expands. Therefore, this video is an invitation to listening, to presence, and to respect. And if this message touched you in any way, share it with someone who could benefit and consider subscribing to the channel. Together, we can continue reflecting on what really matters, with clarity, humanity, and purpose.